We are in the midst of this thing that we like to do around here this time each year at SCC that we call Love Month, where we like to take a few weeks just to kind of zero in on what the Bible has to say about love and marriage and dating and sex and anything in that realm. Because the fact is, when you take an honest look at what the Bible says about those things, whether you're an atheist or the most committed Christian, you have to admit the Bible contains like the best advice in the history of history for dating, love, and marriage and sex. And we don't want to miss out on that. So we take a few weeks each year around this time to study passages like the famous love chapter here in 1 Corinthians 13. Where beginning in verse 4, once again, you probably heard this at a million weddings, but maybe even your own. But Paul says that God's kind of love, the kind of love he wants us to show others, from our spouse to the church to everyone, right, is patient. Verse 4, verse 4. It's patient, it's kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. And so the question we're considering all month long is, okay, how are you doing at being loving by God's definition of love, right? Because this isn't just a superficial, empty love that our world throws around so many times. God's like, no, this is the real thing. This is real love, agape, God's kind of love. How are you doing at choosing the things Paul lists there? Because like we said last time, and I forgot to put on your notes, so I put it on your notes and filled it in for you this time. Love, according to God, God's kind of love, it's not an emotion that you feel, right? It's a state you create via your choices. Okay, it's love, according to God, agape love. It's not just some feeling that you feel, because that would come and go. It's a state you create via choices you make. It has to be, like we said last week. Otherwise, we could never obey Jesus when he says, love your enemies. Because I don't often feel like loving my enemies, right? But he calls us to a higher kind of love than just a superficial feelings-based thing. But that's really good news if you think about it, because it means if I'm not happy with how my love life is going, then things can change. They're not stuck. I just need to get busy creating a better state by doing the things Paul says here. Like the first 5 we covered last time there, right? So patience, kindness, contentment, basically, and humility. Which, by the way, if you missed that, it's online. Please catch that one. Not because I think my sermons are so great, just because I don't want you to miss what Paul is talking about. Because this is essential stuff, man, for your marriage, your future marriage, even other relationships. We don't want you to miss what this passage really means, because it's so easy to read it quickly on a Valentine's card or at a wedding and never really take the time to consider, wait, what does this actually say? So please be sure to check that out online if you missed it. We don't want you to miss it. And we don't want you to miss the next part, starting in verse 5 there, where Paul says, okay, love also does not dishonor others. Now, what does that mean? Well, actually, in the Greek language, Paul originally wrote this down, and that word is hard to define, okay? Translators did a pretty good job with dishonor, but it can also mean like acting in a shameful way, or it can even mean being rude. It can mean acting in an indecent way or improper. In one place you find that word outside of the Bible, in an Egyptian papyrus basically, it's used in a way that implies cursing or taking an oath in connection with a violent act or an inappropriate act. And so it's like, okay, how do we kind of zero in on how to apply this word? So as I was thinking about it, I figured, well, okay, if there's a word that you can use a bunch of different ways, how did Paul mean it? The best way to find out would be to ask him. Now, of course, we can't. But what we can do is look at how he uses that word in other letters and see how he tends to think of that word. And one place, for example, he uses it is in Romans chapter 1. He uses it a couple of times. And long story short, when Paul uses that same word elsewhere, he's often arguing specifically about sexual practices that are out of bounds in God's sight. In fact, the word Paul uses that we're trying to define is the same word you find in Leviticus 18 24 times, which, if you know your Bible, Leviticus 18 is God's chapter on the boundaries for sex. And scholars think Paul's very intentionally using that word to point back to that when he's talking about God's best for your love life. And you can read Leviticus 18 later if you want to. We actually put it on the readings for this week if you follow those on the back there. But long story short, one way I think we could probably interpret what Paul means here is this. What does it mean to not dishonor others? He's saying love stays within God's boundaries for sex, actually. Love stays within God's boundaries for sex. And what is God's boundary for sex? You find very clearly in Scripture, whether our culture likes it or not. It's very simple, man, woman, marriage. Not one moment before, not one moment outside of that. Simply put, man, woman, marriage. Or as author Stephen Arterburn says so well, I put this quote on there, it's one of my favorite quotes. If you're ever like, oh, how do I stay sexually pure? He goes, let me boil it down to you. You are sexually pure when no gratification comes from anyone or anywhere other than your spouse. Okay, not a cheerleader on TV, not 50 Shades. Please don't go see that. Nothing outside of your spouse. Okay, which I know our culture takes one look at it and goes, please. That is so outdated. In the church, statistically, people are looking at this going, please. That is so outdated. I'm going to do sex my way instead. But as Dr. Phil once wisely said so wisely, how's that working for you? Because I don't know about you, but I look around our culture and I don't exactly see better things than I get when I follow God, right? And I hope you understand, God doesn't give us his boundaries to somehow try to ruin our fun in life, okay? If you don't know, God's not even anti-sex, believe it or not. Believe it or not, God actually created sex. That's like a mind blower when I used to do youth ministry for teenagers. What? Read Genesis 1 and 2. God created sex as a good thing, as a beautiful thing. And it's actually because of that he gives us his boundaries. To keep it the good, beautiful thing he created it to be. I don't know about you guys, but at home, Amy and I have this little glass curio. And whenever we have something really special to us, we put it in there. As a pastor, you get some cool stuff over the years. That's not why I'm in ministry. But I had a friend who was from England, and he gave us a teapot from England. I'm like, that is awesome. That goes in the curio. I did a wedding for a couple of people that haven't been here in a couple of weeks, but their wedding was just really meaningful. It was just a super cool story. So we saved their glasses that they gave up. Those are in our curio. Our cake topper from our wedding is in our curio. Why? Why, when we have people over with kids, do we not let them play with these things? Because they're special, they're beautiful, they're meaningful, so we protect them. God goes, same with sex. Sex is supposed to be a beautiful thing. Protect it. That's why he gives us boundaries for it. It's when we take it outside of his boundaries that it destroys the good and damages it and brings all kinds of stuff we don't want, like we see so often in our culture. I mean, look around you. Tell me what you see. Where has doing sex our way gotten us? Really, especially recently, news story after news story of abuse. This Olympic doctor guy, geez. All these people in the media, story week after week, day after day. Where do you think that comes from? Following God's standards? No, that comes from, I'm going to do it my way. Right? To the friends that we work with at our other jobs, to just friends we have on social media, and the broken relationships, broken hearts, broken lives, broken bodies in some case, and a hopelessness that we hear all the time among millennials about marriage and kids and who cares anymore. Ouch. I hear it every day from coworkers and friends, and I'm just saying, man, is doing sex our way really getting us better results than doing it God's way? Not from what I've seen. Because I also look to friends who have fought and struggled, because it's not easy, but fought and struggled to stay in God's boundaries. My wife and I look at what we have as we've fought to stay in his boundaries before we were even engaged. And I see the blessings and the peace and the trust and the intimacy that we and our other friends have that have fought that this world can't even imagine. And I go, man, I'll stick with God's way. It's not always easy, definitely not. And all of us, pastors included, have struggles in terms of that. But in fact, if you need some help with that, we put the 2 best resources I've ever found on your sheet there. Every Man's Battle and Every Woman's Battle by a couple of different authors. And because we need help, and it is everyone's battle. If we pretend like we have it together, we're just setting ourselves up to crash even harder. It's called denial. It's not good. Come to Celebrate Recovery. But the idea is, man, God's like, I have these boundaries. Will you fight to stay in them? Whatever your struggle is, Jesus can help you. There is someone who has beat it before. Listen to their stories. Jesus is the way. He can help. And it is totally worth it. There's a freedom and a strength and a supernatural hope in him if we really commit to do it his way. The question is, will we choose his way? Will we choose not to dishonor others? You might say, well, why do they translate it that way? Well, if you think about it, if I take sex outside of God's boundaries, it's about as dishonoring as it gets to him and others, isn't it? To look at someone else or even myself as just this object for my own gratification instead of as a person, as a daughter, as a son of the King he lovingly created. Man, I can't think of much more dishonoring than that. So Paul says, love does not dishonor others. Love stays in bounds sexually. Lust is all about me, right? Lust does where you look at someone else as an object, right? Love doesn't do that. Love is about the other person. As Paul says next there, right? Love, he says, isn't self-seeking, which is actually a principle you see throughout this Bible, really, right? I mean, that's like the number one thing you see in there. Because, simply put, God's love is never a love that's all about me, myself, and I, is it? Imagine if Jesus had been all about himself. He's in the garden, God, I don't want to do this. If he had been all about himself, so I'm not going to die. They can fend for themselves. No, he goes, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because I love him so much. I will die on the cross for them. Right? God's love is selfless. Love is not about me, myself, and I. Lust is all about me. Love is about the other person. In fact, one of my absolute favorite passages in the Bible about marriage that really drives us home in terms of marriage is in Ephesians 5. And we don't have time for it today. We'll do an extensive look at that in a series in a few weeks when we're talking about humility, because it goes with that too. But just the verse that gets that passage going here. I love it. We put it on your notes pages there. Paul's writing to a different church, and he's starting to talk about marriage. And he leads off with this statement. He goes, husbands, wives, you want a great marriage? Here's how you get it. Verse 21 of chapter 5 of Ephesians. You submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Then he goes on and says, wives, here's your role. Husbands, here's your role. But your job, you want a good marriage, you submit to one another. Which in the Greek language, that was originally written. I love that too, because the word we translate as submit is actually a word that literally means to choose to rank yourself under the other person. Right? To choose to rank yourself under your spouse. I love that. In other words, Paul says, choose to let go of selfishness in marriage. To let go of all about me? No. You choose to make it your goal in marriage to selflessly, lovingly serve your spouse. Choose to do that, by the way. Don't do it because you have to or because you do it because you choose to. He says, out of reverence for Christ, to honor him. Do it for him. Why is that important? Because there will be days I don't feel like choosing it for my wife. Not just out of love for your spouse. There will be times when you don't want to do it for your spouse. So be real with yourself. And listen to Paul, and he goes, dude, this two becoming one thing is not always easy. So if you're going to get this, you got to choose to serve them, regardless of what they're acting like. You do it for Jesus, not for the spouse, right? In fact, if you want to make marriage a competition, like our culture loves to do, let's see who can get, sitcoms are obnoxious, aren't they? The husband's like, I have this great idea, so I'm going to sneak around and try to do my idea for myself without my wife knowing, and then she's going to sneak around and try to do something without him knowing. Man, marriage is not supposed to be this competition for what we want. But if you want to make it a competition, Paul would say, okay, see who can outserve the other person. See who can be more selfless. I love telling this story. When Amy and I were first married, we may have taken that too far. There was a time, I don't remember what it was, but it was like a birthday or a Christmas or something, and she wanted to do something nice for me. And I was like, no, it's good, because you never let me do anything nice for you. We actually had a fight over who got to do something nice for the other person. I'm like, okay, it's not good to fight, but at least we're fighting about that. And you don't have to go that far. But see who can outserve the other person. See who can be more selfless in a marriage if you want to compete. Then Paul says you'll have a thriving marriage. Because God's kind of love isn't selfish. Nor, he says, is it easily angered. Now, spouses, don't be elbowing the person next to you on this one, okay? That's not easily angered. Would you agree that's a principle our culture really needs right now? You go back about maybe 2 years, it's just everyone is angry about everything. Goodness gracious, this week, Doritos. Did y'all see that news story? Like a female marketing person at Doritos said, guys tend to be messy and not care about the cheese on their fingers, but ladies try to be nicer and neater, so we'll do something to help the ladies not get so much cheese on their hands. And women, some women freaked out about that and we should boycott Doritos. And they're like, all women should join us and boycott Doritos. I'm like, it's not enough that you're mad, you want everyone else to be mad with you too. Goodness gracious, what are we doing? Why are we so mad about everything? You know what's interesting to me? I've read through the Bible a number of times, and one thing I cannot find in there is anywhere it says that it's good for people to be angry. Right? Now, I know some of you will quote this verse to me, and it does say, in your anger, don't sin. Right? Anger is not a sin. It's not a sin to be angry. But don't miss the rest of that verse. We like to quote that part, and we miss the rest where God says, don't let the sun go down, though, while you're still angry, and don't give the devil a foothold. Oh, do you ever equate those together? But Matt, someone might say, God gets angry, and that's true, but you need to understand, when God gets angry, It's with his anger, a perfect, I know everything about the situation kind of anger, a righteous anger. And we don't have that godness as far as our perspective goes, do we? How many times have you ever gotten mad about something only to find out later there was nothing to get mad about in the first place, right? That's why I think James says this. He goes, man, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Why? Here's a big part. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. You will hear it in the church. I have a righteous anger. It's okay to be angry. Really? What Bible did you find that in? Because it's not ours. Everything I ever see in Scripture is, okay, it's not a sin to get angry, but anger makes you do dumb stuff, okay? You need to get rid of it. No, don't let a root of bitterness grow up among you, he says in Hebrews. We can go on and on and on. David gets angry and almost causes this big issue, and this guy's wife has to save him, and if you know that story, you know what I'm talking about. Anger is never a beautiful thing in the Bible when it's humans doing it, okay? So instead of jumping so quickly to anger, James says, why not make it your goal to jump quickly to listening? Whoa. Imagine how different our culture would be if people did that. Instead of, Doritos, instead of jumping to anger, why don't we listen to the CEO and her reasoning and why she was trying to do that? Be quick to listen. Let me listen. Let me make sure I really understand what you're saying before I get mad about it, because it might not even be anything to get mad about. How many of you married people, this happens to Amy and me all the time, how many of you have ever had an argument you weren't really having? You ever do that? Like you're arguing about something and halfway through you stop and you're like, wait, what are you talking about? I'm talking about this. Well, what are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about that. Well, I agree with you on that. Well, I agree with you on that. Well, why are we fighting? I don't know. Let's talk. Okay. We got to listen. Make sure you really hear the other person. Be quick to listen, the Bible says, and slow to get angry. It's worth a try, man, because as James says, human anger is not ideal for us. Every time the Bible talks about it, the Bible urges you to do things like take a breath, step back, be a good listener, be slow to get angry. And when you get angry, ditch it as quick as possible. And how do we do that? I love how author Brant Hansen wrote about this on Twitter. He actually wrote a great book called Unoffendable. We put that on your notes too as a resource. Check that out if you want a fun read about anger. If you want a more serious read in depth, the anger workbook is good too. But Brant Hansen, I love this. He says this. He goes, most people think there are two ways to deal with anger. Vent it or repress it. That's false. There's another way. It's much, much harder. It takes work, but it's immeasurably healthier for body and soul, and it's free. It's called forgiveness. I love that, which is exactly the Bible's prescription for the follower of Christ. And oddly enough, it's the next thing Paul mentions in terms of what love looks like, right? As he says next, love doesn't keep a record of wrongs. Almost like Paul wrote this sermon for me. We'll just go on to the next one, right? Doesn't keep a record of wrongs. What's that mean? Simple. Love forgives. I love that. My wife will love this one too. In Greek, doesn't keep a record of wrongs is actually an accounting term. It's for a ledger of unpaid bills. Isn't that a great analogy? Paul goes, you don't go around keeping a ledger of everyone's offenses against you. That's not what love does. Because as God himself has shown through the cross, his love doesn't do that, right? Doesn't harbor the spirit of revenge and go, oh, I can't wait till judgment day so I can smite all these people. No, he doesn't do that, right? When we offended him, all the stuff you've done that you feel guilt and shame for, what did God do? He gave you a way to be saved from it. He offered his own son to die in your place, to take responsibility on himself, the hell we deserve on himself, so we don't have to. And he still gives us a choice to accept or reject it, but look at the cross, man. God does not sit around bitter and angry and waiting to get revenge. He offers you forgiveness. Paid for it with his perfect son's life. Because that's what God's love does. It does work through anger and does forgive. So if we're to truly love like he says, we can't miss this one, right? We got to forgive too like Jesus forgave us. So Matt, people say sometimes, I'm just supposed to act like what that person did to me didn't matter? That I don't matter? No, not at all. If it didn't matter, you wouldn't need to forgive them for it, right? The fact that you have to forgive someone implies there's something to forgive that was bad, right? Forgiveness also does not mean you don't do anything about something that might need some attention, right? Amy and I hate child sex trafficking. It makes us very angry. But we don't sit around and complain about it. We partner with AIM and support them so they can rescue kids from it. We talk about it at church so people are aware of it. You do something about it. As Les Carter says, actually, in that anger workbook, he goes, if you're going to constructively deal with anger, it means you seek to protect what feels threatened while also considering the needs and feelings of other people at the same time. I'll read that again. Dealing constructively with anger is seeking to protect whatever's feeling threatened, that's making you angry, while also considering the needs and feelings of other people at the same time. Forgiveness doesn't mean you ignore injustice. It also doesn't mean you fail to learn from the past. You know, if someone has proven to be abusive, don't keep going back to them. You can forgive them without putting yourself in harm's way again and again and again. It doesn't mean you ignore serious warning signs. Jesus teaches us, man, I'm sending you out like sheep among fairies? No, sheep among wolves. People are going to be bad and nasty to you. Be smart. You know, you'll recognize a tree by its fruit. Watch out for false teachers. He had no delusions that, everyone's going to be friendly and happy out in the world. No, there are dangerous people, and you need to watch out for them. Right? Forgiveness doesn't mean I walk around just going, okay, well, that enable bad behavior, enable irresponsible behavior. No. It's just saying that as I do set boundaries, as I do seek justice and love mercy, I walk humbly with God too, and I leave what people do with Him. It's not my job to get revenge on them. My job to walk humbly with Him, seek justice, love mercy, as Micah 6:8 says, but it's His job to judge. It's His job to deal with that. So I forgive by leaving what that person did with Him. And I'm going to not carry around this bitterness, this hate all the time. I don't keep a ledger of all the bad stuff they've done. I especially, married people, don't keep it so I can throw it back in someone's face when we're in the middle of an argument. Don't act like you've never done that. Love doesn't do that. Love lets it go. God says, let it go. Leave it with me. Because His love doesn't keep a record of wrongs. It forgives. It also, Paul says next, doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. And while that's a true statement in general, this is a really interesting part of this chapter. Because remember, this chapter is part of a larger letter to a very specific church. And scholars think when Paul says this part, he's actually possibly referring to the idea of gossip. You don't delight in evil in the sense of gossip, which is, of course, never a problem in churches. But let's just say that maybe that's what he was talking about here. Gossip. I love how financial expert and author Dave Ramsey once put it. He was talking to a bunch of new employees, and he says, this company does not put up with gossip. He goes, well, let me define gossip for you. He says, gossip is talking about a problem with someone who has no way to do anything about it. Ooh, I love that definition. One more time. Gossip is when you complain about a problem with someone who has no power to fix it. There it is, right? You really have a concern, talk to someone who can fix it. Otherwise, it's just gossip. It's just there to make the company look bad, to make someone else look bad. And in case you don't know, the Bible does not like that at all. We put just a few verses of many on your sheets there. But Proverbs 16:28, a perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. Proverbs 20:19, a gossip betrays a confidence. So avoid anyone who talks too much. 2 Thessalonians 3:11 and 12, another letter Paul writes to another church. He's kind of in mid-thought, but he says to them, we hear some among you are idle and disruptive. They're not busy, they're busybodies. Such people we command and urge in the Lord Jesus Christ to settle down and earn the food they eat. Quit sitting around talking and go do something with your life, right? The Bible's perspective, according to God, gossip is bad, okay? And it's not something love does. Instead, Paul says, love enjoys truth. Which again, in and of itself, how often is gossip based on truth? Not always, right? Truth is better. But also in context, Paul's probably referring to the gospel message. And I love that, because what he's saying is love enjoys talking with people about Jesus, not talking about people behind their backs. So the real question for us this morning and all month long and always, of course, how are you doing at choosing to be loving by those parts of God's definition? Because again, that's enough for 1 week. We'll tackle the rest next time. And I know we started last week, but I don't want to hit you with too much. As my mentor pastor says, don't feed them more than they can eat. Okay, we'll stop there. That's enough, right? So how are you doing at choosing love by enjoying the truth, enjoying the gospel, not enjoying gossip? How are you doing at choosing love in terms of forgiving people rather than carrying around bitterness, racking up a record that you can throw in someone's face? How are you doing at choosing selfless service rather than selfishness in marriage, at work, at church? How are you doing at choosing God's best for your sex life rather than this world's cheap, empty imitation? Even when it's difficult, please hear me, it's worth it to choose the right. How are you doing at being loving by that part of God's definition? And if you're not where you want to be, then again, good news. It's a choice. Love isn't a feeling you feel. It's a state you create through your choices. So just get busy creating a better state, starting this week, right? So again, like last time, I want to challenge you to not only just think about this, but actually do something with it this week. And grab a journal, maybe use a note on your phone, and keep track each day, one way you did each one of these. I hope you did that last time too. It was a very good challenge for me, and I was very happy with a few things I discovered, and then other days I was like, dang, we missed it. So try it this week. Each day, one way that you were gospel focused and chose not to gossip, right? One way you chose to forgive rather than get even. One way you selflessly served someone else. And one way you chose to show that the only thing that needs to be hot in your life is your spouse or your future spouse. That's one of my favorite quotes from this pastor in San Diego. He said he called like Xfinity or whatever his cable provider was, and they gave him all these like channels as this like bonus. Here's all these channels, and it's like HBO and all these other channels that show like bad movies and sexual content. So he calls, he goes, thanks so much for the free promotion, but I'd like to cut it back to just like, Golf Channel and whatever, the NFL channel. And they're like, oh, why, sir? But they're all free, you don't have to worry about it. I love it. He goes, yeah, but the only thing that needs to be hot in my life is my wife, so please cancel those. I love that quote, man. I pray you'll give this a try. Read the Bible readings as you do. They're there to help you and remind you and help you get a fuller understanding of each of these. And just experience how truly great God's love is. Not just for you, but as you choose to let it flow through you. It's an awesome thing. Let's pray together. Father, I just thank you so much. As so many people are thinking about love this week and what they think that means, and our culture is trying to sell us candy based on what they say it means, thank you for this pure, beautiful, awesome picture of the ultimate love. God's your love. That isn't limited to one day. That doesn't depend on candy hearts. God, this is available to every person, single, married, 10 kids, no kids, whatever age. God, your love is there, and it's more than enough every day. So thank you for this, God. And I just imagine how much better our relationships would be with friends, with coworkers, certainly with our spouses, even just by this time next Sunday, if we took you seriously in terms of just these things we looked at today. So I pray we would. But of course, this is your love, God, not ours. We don't naturally have this. So we need your supernatural help to get there. So as we make every effort toward these things, would you please help us be more loving? Help us honor you and honor others by how we look at them and how we understand sex. Help us be gospel-focused, not gossip-focused. Help us selflessly serve rather than seek our own gratification. Help us drop anger and choose to forgive. And ultimately, help us just be a great reflection of Jesus to this culture that so desperately needs to know him. Because God, when we get these things, when we get what your love looks like, this is the complete opposite of how people are living out there. So they'll notice, and they'll see something that they desperately need. And give us the words to tell them and point them to the Jesus we got it from when we can. Thank you so much in Jesus' name. Amen.